One of the most subtle but far-reaching changes after the center loosens is the way time is experienced. Not time as measured by clocks, not schedules or calendars, but time as pressure. People often don't realize how much of their tension comes from time until that tension begins to fade. Then a question appears. If there's no center managing life anymore, how does time still work? This episode is about time, not as something to control, not as something to race against, but as a natural container that continues without pressure. Most people relate to time through management. Time is something to use well, something to waste or save, something that can run out. The center treats time as a resource that reflects on identity. Am I productive enough? Am I behind? Am I ahead? Am I doing life correctly? These questions turn time into a constant evaluation. When the center is present, time rarely feels neutral. It feels loaded. Moments are compared. Progress is tracked. The future is rehearsed. Even rest is measured against what could or should be happening instead. Time becomes something that presses in on experience. When the center begins to loosen, this pressure often fades before anything else is clearly understood. People notice that days feel different. Not slower in a dramatic way. Quieter. There is still movement, still planning, still coordination, but less internal urgency. This can feel disorienting at first. People worry they are becoming passive. They ask themselves, why don't I feel rushed anymore? Why don't deadlines feel as heavy? Why does the future feel less charged? They assume something important has been lost. But what has actually disappeared is not time awareness. It is time ownership. The center believes it owns time, that it stands inside a timeline and must manage its position. Past, present, and future become personal territories. The past defines identity. The future carries responsibility. The present becomes a narrow bridge between them. This creates pressure, because the center feels responsible for holding time together. Without a center, time is no longer held. It simply unfolds. This does not mean planning disappears. It means planning is no longer tied to self-continuity. Plans still happen. Appointments are still made. Preparation still occurs. But there is less mental rehearsal, less internal looping, less sense that something must constantly be anticipated. This is an important distinction. Time without pressure does not mean living only in the present. It means the present is no longer strained by constant reference to past and future. Memory remains. Anticipation remains. But they are not carried as burdens. One way to see this clearly is to notice how the mind used to revisit moments. With a center, the past is frequently re-entered. Mistakes are replayed. Regrets are refined. Narratives are adjusted. This creates a sense of time dragging behind you, a weight that follows. Without a center, the past still exists as memory, but it loses its grip. Events are remembered, lessons are learned, but the emotional charge fades more quickly. The past becomes informational rather than defining. The same shift happens with the future. With a center, the future feels heavy. It must be planned correctly. It must be secured. It must justify the present. Anxiety often lives here. The fear of getting it wrong. Without a center, the future is still considered, but it is no longer personal. It becomes a set of possibilities rather than a test. Preparation happens, but worry does not need to accompany it. This does not mean nothing matters. It means meaning is no longer tied to timeline success. Life is not experienced as something to complete. It is something that continues. Time without pressure also changes how urgency works. Urgency still arises when needed. If something requires immediate response, attention sharpens. Action happens. But urgency no longer spreads across everything. It is specific, situational. It appears and disappears naturally. With a center, urgency often becomes chronic. Everything feels important. Everything feels late. Everything feels like it must be done now. This constant activation drains energy. Without a center, urgency becomes clean. It belongs only where it is required. Another place this shift becomes obvious is waiting. With a center, waiting feels like failure, like time being wasted. There is restlessness, impatience, a sense that something should be happening. Without a center, waiting is simply waiting. There is still preference, still desire for things to move, but there is less resistance to the pause. Time passes without friction. This also changes how people experience aging. With a center, aging threatens identity. It is compared, measured, feared. Time becomes something that takes things away. Without a center, aging is still noticed. The body changes, energy shifts, but there is less narrative about loss, less comparison to imagined timelines. Life continues in different forms. Time without pressure also alters how productivity feels. With a center, productivity is often a measure of worth. How much was accomplished? How efficiently time was used? Without a center, productivity becomes practical. Things get done because they need to be done, not because they prove anything. This reduces burnout. It also reduces procrastination, because there is less internal resistance. Another subtle change is how beginnings and endings are experienced. With a center, beginnings carry hope. Endings carry failure or success. They are emotionally loaded. Without a center, beginnings and endings are recognized as transitions. There may still be excitement. There may still be sadness, but the weight of narrative softens. Moments are allowed to complete without being archived as identity markers. This also changes how people relate to time spent with others. There is less pressure to make moments count, less concern about whether time was meaningful enough. Connection is allowed to be simple, ordinary. Not every interaction needs to be memorable. This often deepens presence. A common misunderstanding here is thinking that time without pressure leads to stagnation. But stagnation comes from avoidance, not from lack of urgency. When the center is gone, avoidance often decreases, because there is less fear of future outcomes. Tasks are approached when needed. Rest happens when needed. Movement continues naturally. Another trap is trying to maintain this state. People notice relief and try to hold on to it. They try to stay timeless. This reintroduces pressure. Time does not need to be escaped. It needs to be unowned. The simplest orientation is this: let time pass. Let planning happen when required. Let memory inform without defining. Let anticipation arise without anxiety. No one needs to manage time. If time feels quieter now, that is not disengagement. If days feel less dramatic, that is not emptiness. It is the absence of unnecessary pressure. Time does not need a center to move forward. It does not need supervision. Life unfolds. Moments arise. Moments pass. And functioning continues. In the next episode, we'll look at usefulness. Not usefulness as purpose. Not usefulness as identity. But how contribution happens naturally when there is no one trying to matter. Because this is another place where relief quietly appears.